So how do you reconcile not wanting to be needy while also accepting that you do have needs? This course is designed to help you explore this question for yourself. I'm Jay Fields. I'm a somatic coach and an author, and I help people create a work life and a life in general in which their insides match their outsides. What does that mean? It means understanding the 3 core skill sets that people across all circumstances need when it comes to needs. Recognizing that you have needs, respecting your needs, and when necessary, expressing your needs. If a global pandemic taught us anything, it's that work has to fit life. And if that's the case, then not having needs is not an option. Join me and we'll uncover your needs and refine your ability to value and express them. This is about being able to make decisions that drive your day-to-day career in a way that nourishes you and helps you to contribute with integrity and to make a positive impact. Before we can explore needs together, we have to get on the same page about what a need is and what it isn't. One psychological model of needs that I find simple and relatable comes from Clayton Alderfer. In his model, he puts needs into 3 basic categories: existence, relatedness, and growth. Existence needs have to do with our basic and physiological needs as humans, things like food, water, rest, shelter, and security. Relatedness needs refer to things like belonging and love in friendships and intimate relationships, as well as respect and feelings of accomplishment in our work and life. Finally, growth needs refer to the needs humans have around creativity, self-understanding, and reaching their personal fulfillment. As you might imagine, addressing existence needs is the primary goal. For example, if you don't have reliable food and shelter, it's hard to focus on creativity. So the model proposes that as we get our more basic existence needs met, we can then focus on our relatedness needs and then finally our growth needs. Take a moment right now and consider this for yourself. You can pause the video if you like. What category of needs do you feel you're most focusing on in your life right now? I'm asking you this because something I've found through working with clients is that if they're mostly focusing on, say, relatedness needs in their life, the needs in the growth category feel to them more like wants or things that would be nice to have. They don't see those things as needs. And that makes sense because our needs are hierarchical. Existence needs are more important when it comes to life and death. But that doesn't mean that the things in the relatedness and growth categories are wants. They're still needs that are common to all people. I encourage you to consider your needs across this whole spectrum then. Understanding that there are different categories and different levels of needs is a strong foundation for embracing and working with your needs in a more conscious way. Despite there being such a wide range of human needs that psychological and academic models acknowledge, there are societal structures that say it's selfish to focus on your own needs. This tension between having needs but feeling selfish for having needs is why I think so many people have never really sat down and thought about their needs. Or if they have, they've chosen to ignore their needs because they don't think they get to matter. And that's sad and ultimately destructive because the needs don't just go away. They're needs. And when they get ignored, they have consequences on our physical and mental health, on our relationships, and on our social impact. Many of the clients I work with come to me needless because they either don't know their needs or they ignore them. These needless clients are in unhealthy patterns with the people they work and live with. They report being exhausted from people-pleasing, feeling unseen and underappreciated, and feeling like a shell version of themselves. It's hard for them to see that listening to and expressing their needs would actually benefit the people around them. But over time, they see it, that respecting their needs gives them more energy, focus, and clarity. It makes them feel more seen and appreciated, which lends itself to a more kindness and generosity. And ultimately, they have more access to their own potential, so they can offer more. Because think about it. If I'm not allowing myself a need for my existence, like say rest, I don't have the bandwidth to show up for myself or others at the level of relatedness or growth. I think about this in terms of being fragmented versus being whole. Every time you don't respect a need of yours, you give a part of yourself away. And the more parts of yourself you give away, the less of you you have. And then you're operating as one of my clients described herself, an Energizer battery in a meat suit. And the battery doesn't stop until it dies. Respecting your needs, on the other hand, means recognizing that you're a person. It means that you get to care for your wholeness as a person. And that means that you ultimately have more to give from your wholeness, from your integrity. Before we go on, consider this. What were some of the messages you got growing up about having needs? Also, what messages, explicit or not, do you get from your work culture about having needs? Open up the handout called Messages About Needs and take stock of some of the external messages that you might have internalized about having needs. It's a great place to start in this process of understanding what may make it difficult for you to respect your needs. Remember the client I mentioned who identified as being an Energizer battery in a meat suit? She's an office manager in a busy medical practice, and she holds herself to incredibly high standards when it comes to her work. In addition to expecting perfection in everything she does, she also often goes in on her days off or picks up the slack for other people on her team. In our work together, I mentioned how it seems that she doesn't get to have any needs, and she agreed. She also agreed that no one else puts that on her. Though her team members benefit from how hard she works, they aren't holding her to those high expectations. She is. Oh, and by the way, she's my client because her boss hired me to work with her because along with those high expectations of herself come high levels of stress. And in that stress, my client's been having anger management problems at work. Yet another example for you of how being needless ultimately doesn't benefit the people around you. So in order to have the clarity to acknowledge your needs, first you have to be honest about what your expectations of yourself are, because high expectations make it impossible to see needs. And here's a hint. As you're considering this, look for the ways that your expectations of yourself may go hand in hand with the external messages you've internalized about having needs. For example, if you've gotten the message that the outcome of the project is more important than your personal life, then you're more likely to set the expectation for yourself that you need to work on weekends. Or if you've gotten the message that your needs in general aren't important, then you might hold yourself to the high standard of making sure everyone on your team is happy, even if it's at your expense in some way. So with that, I invite you to use the handout called Setting Fair Expectations to help you consider what standards you hold yourself to and explore what expectations might be more reasonable. Having fair expectations of yourself will set you up to be able to more accurately assess and prioritize your needs. When I've asked people about their needs in the workplace, I've been told many times that it can be hard to even recognize them. Recently, a client told me that knowing what his needs are always seems to start with a feeling that something's off or not right. He said when he can identify that he's having a feeling that he doesn't like, then he can sleuth to figure out what's causing the feeling, and in finding that, figure out the need that isn't being met. For example, if he finds that he's agitated and upset and looks underneath the agitation, he might find that it's because he felt disrespected in an exchange he had with a coworker. Recognizing that he's upset about not feeling respected helps him to see, and this goes back to the relatedness category of needs, that he has the need to feel respected. And this is a common theme for all the people I've worked with, that without a connection to your feelings, you can't identify your needs. And this is tough because so many of us aren't in touch with our emotions. The typical mode of operating at work is to adapt to what's needed of you, and in that adapting, automatically suppress your emotions. I have a whole course here on LinkedIn Learning about managing your emotions at work. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out as a way of helping you to identify and work with your emotions. For the purposes of this course, though, I'd like you to take a shot at practicing noticing a feeling you have and what that need might be that's linked with it. So let's try one together. I'd like you to check in with your body and look for any feelings of physical discomfort you might feel. Like, are you hot or cold? Are you stiff? Are you hungry? If you're hot or cold, then you have a need to change the clothes you have on, or maybe open up a window or turn up the heat. If you're stiff, the need is to move your body. If you're hungry, the need is to eat. See how that works? Well, it works the same way with emotional feelings as it does with physical feelings. Like my client, when you can identify an emotional feeling that's off or unpleasant in some way, it's an indication that one of your needs is getting its toes stepped on. I'd like you then to play around with identifying your needs. For now, don't worry about doing anything about it or making a request to have your need met. Just begin to become aware of how you might know what your needs are. You can use the handout called Identifying Needs to help you discover some common needs that might come up for you in the course of a typical day or week, as well as some core needs that are important to you. If this is hard for you, use the accompanying list of feeling words to help you be in touch with what you might be experiencing. If you find that helpful and want more support with this, a tool I've found incredibly useful for folks linking their feelings with their needs are the feelings and needs cards that are associated with nonviolent communication. Founded by Marshall Rosenberg, nonviolent communication is often used as a conflict resolution tool, but at its heart, it's about learning to interact with ourselves and others in a way that's rooted in compassion and empathy. With that, the cards they've created are a simple and effective tool for beginning to uncover and clarify the often nuanced feelings and needs you might be experiencing. If you've historically gotten tripped up by even knowing what your needs are, being able to link them to your feelings is the key to first discovering your needs. It's one thing to recognize your needs, but it's another thing to respect them enough to change your behavior. In fact, maybe everything I've covered up until now about recognizing your needs isn't anything new to you. Maybe you easily recognize your needs, but you have a hard time prioritizing them. Maybe you ignore your needs because you think something bad will happen if you do listen to them, like you'll be seen as a slacker if you take a full hour for lunch. Or maybe you think there'll be a good outcome to ignoring your needs, that if you just push through, do even more, take on even more, then you'll be successful. Or if you take care of the needs of everyone on your team, you're a good person. Or maybe you have a hard time believing that your needs are as important as the needs of those around you. If that's the case for you, I want to share a concept that I've seen have a profound impact on how people think about whether or not their needs get to matter, profound enough to actually influence them to prioritize their needs in their behavior. It's about a mental paradigm that most of us unconsciously have that makes respecting your own needs fundamentally difficult. Let me give you an example. Imagine your boss tells you that they need a deliverable 1 week ahead of an already tight schedule. You notice that when your boss says this, your body gets hot and irritated. It's your kid's birthday this weekend, and your boss's agenda interferes with the promise you made your son to do something special with him. So your boss has a need for an expedited deliverable, and you have a need to spend time with your son to celebrate his birthday. You also have a need, I would imagine, to keep your job. What most people do in a situation like this is adapt to their boss's need, suppress their emotion, and ignore or at the very least alter or minimize their own need. It's as if as soon as one need gets put on the table, especially if that's the need of someone who you see as more important than you because of their role, now only their reality gets to matter. And so in that moment, you now live in one reality, and it isn't yours, it's your boss's. But that way of thinking is built on a false premise. There isn't one reality, there are two. Your boss's reality, in which the deliverable is needed sooner, and yours, in which you're needed at your son's birthday. I get how it would be easy to say that your boss's reality gets to win out because you don't want to lose your job. But that's different than their reality being the only reality. See what I'm saying? The point I'm trying to make is this. If you're accustomed to thinking that there's only ever one reality, and most of us do this unconsciously, then you stop even seeing where there's any room for you to have needs. But there's never just one subjective reality. One project doesn't mean one reality if that project has 4 people on the team. One vision statement doesn't even mean one reality if the organization has hundreds or thousands of employees. I'm not saying that everyone's reality gets to be accommodated at all times. That's impossible. But what I am saying is that there are as many realities as there are people in any given situation, which means fundamentally that your reality is valid. And that means the needs you have in your reality get to matter. At the very least, they get to matter enough to be considered. In case you're finding this hard to grasp, let me give you a non-work related context. If your spouse needs alone time and you need connection, though it's unlikely that you can get those 2 needs met at the same time, each of your needs are equally real to both of you. Your need doesn't make the reality of the other person's need go away. Get it? I'd like you to really consider this, because understanding that there's never one subjective reality that you're operating in has the ability to change everything about how you view prioritizing your needs. Let's unpack this idea of one reality versus 2 a little more. Let's say your company culture really values networking. The message you get from your manager is that you need to go to at least one networking event a week, or people are going to think that you're not in. But you're an introvert, and networking drains the energy you have to do the other parts of your job well as takes time from evening activities you find meaningful. If there gets to be only one reality, the one of your company culture, then you're left with just 2 options: comply with it or defy it. I use the word options because complying or defying aren't choices. They're reactions to a situation. Complying looks like setting aside your reality and stifling your needs in order to go to all the networking events. Defying would look like not going to the networking events and hoping you get away with it without losing respect, or worse, your job. In general, defying feels like you have to fight or campaign for your reality, because if you don't win, your reality doesn't get to exist. Conversely, there's also the feeling that if you get what you need, someone else doesn't get to get what they need because your reality is the one that won. Pause to consider this. Do you notice whether you have a tendency to either comply or defy? What do you feel like when you do? You might notice that there's something about complying or defying that feels off or not good. And remember, if that's the case, it's an indication that your needs aren't being acknowledged or met. In an ideal world, your manager can see your reality and takes it into consideration. She sees that you're an introvert and that you contribute to the team in various ways, and she doesn't campaign so hard for you to network. But that doesn't always happen, in part because your manager, like most people, is probably also unconsciously operating from the idea that there's only one reality. They're not accustomed to considering multiple realities. They, too, have become accustomed to feeling like they have to win. That's where it becomes your responsibility to speak up and to let her know what's true for you. To say something like, hey, I know that networking is a part of the company culture, but I don't think weekly networking is going to work for me. What do we do about that? By asking for your reality and needs to be considered, you take yourself out of complying or defying and give yourself the opportunity to have some choice in the matter. But I imagine that if you're not used to asking for your reality and your needs to be considered, doing so doesn't just feel needy, it feels demanding. I get it. But there's nothing wrong with cleanly and clearly stating what's true for you and asking for it to be considered. By making clean requests, I mean not overly apologizing or packing your request with a lot of information that's meant to somehow validate or excuse your request. You can certainly name how you think it might land for the person to receive, as in saying, I imagine this isn't going to be what you want to hear given how behind schedule you feel. And then simply state your request. But I'm going to need an extra day. It's clean and it's clear, which is how you can make requests when you embody that your reality is different than other people's realities. Your needs exist within your reality and no one else's. And you don't have to take away someone else's reality in order for yours to be valid. If you comply or defy with someone else's reality, it doesn't inherently make your reality or your needs any less valid. It just makes them ignored. And I know this is heady stuff, but it's important to understand in order to get underneath the old and potentially unconscious ways you think about who and what gets to matter. There's another piece that goes with understanding the impact of one reality versus two in prioritizing your needs. And that has to do with how you see yourself in relationship to other people. Years ago, I had a client who was the founder of a nonprofit. He had a small staff that had been with him from the very beginning and was dedicated to the cause. He'd reached out to me because he was overworked and overstressed, and it was impacting his health, his team, and his family. He explained to me how if someone on his team had a need, whether for family leave or for his timely feedback or approval of something, he'd always grant it. It didn't matter if it meant that his needs got ignored, which they regularly did. Though he was the founder and director, he was in a pattern of complying with what everyone else needed. I asked him to consider how it felt in his body when he did that. Specifically, when he complied, did he feel like he was making himself less than, greater than, or on equal ground as his employees? He was immediately able to identify that he felt less than, or in some way below them when he complied with what they needed at his own expense. And in seeing that, it became clear to him that if he ignored their needs and defied them by doing what he wanted, it would feel to him like he was putting himself in a greater than position to them. And this, being better than anyone else, was so against his values that he didn't want to do anything that would ever feel that way, even if it meant ignoring his own needs. So I talked to him about how this better than, less than stance comes out when a person feels that there's only one reality and only one person gets to win, while everyone else is left to either comply or defy. And that way of thinking puts a person into a kind of mental mathematics where you're constantly trying to calculate whether you're greater than or less than this other person. Or said a different way, whether your needs are more or less important than theirs. Let's try a practice. I want to give you the opportunity to identify what equal ground feels like. But first, let's start with this. What does it feel like in your body when you feel less than? Maybe you feel small or powerless or voiceless. And what about when you feel greater than? Maybe you puff up or you feel armored or have the feeling of literally looking down your nose. Now, what about when you put yourself on equal ground with someone else? What does it feel like to hold yourself as the same or as equal to another person? Maybe you feel your spine straighten or your legs feel more solid. Sometimes my clients report feeling more firm while also being engaged and receptive. I'm asking you what these stances feel like because they play an important role in whether or not you're likely to recognize, respect, and express a need you have. If you put yourself in the less than position to someone or something, you're more likely to comply with them and ignore your needs. Can you feel how that would be true? If you put yourself in the greater than position to someone or something, you're more likely to get your needs met in a way that's defiant and potentially destructive to the relationship or to another need being met, like, as an example, the need to keep your job. But if you put yourself on equal ground, that's a way of embodying that there are two realities, yours and theirs, and that they're both important. And from that place, different possibilities come into play. Remember how I said that I think about this exploration of prioritizing needs as being whole versus giving parts of yourself away? Putting yourself on equal ground in your mind, in your energy, and in how you hold yourself is a crucial part of showing up as a whole human with needs that are important. Having said that, what if you've historically not been perceived as being on equal ground by the external world because of a difference that's either seen to others or unseen to others but known to you? It's very real that some of us have had to deal with systemic oppression, conscious or unconscious bias, and routine microaggressions that continually broadcast the message that you are less than. Though it's wrong and reprehensible in every way that a person would put themselves above you for something they perceive makes you less than, it doesn't change the inherent truth that you are on equal ground with every human being simply because of your humanness. It does, however, make it more difficult to embody this in a way that's unshakable. Which is why I encourage everyone to use their body to practice holding this quality for yourself, no matter who you are. Because being able to feel the difference between less than, greater than, and equal to in your body, and how you have the ability to change your experience through how you hold your body, is such a great reminder that no one else gives you your worth. That's an inside-out job. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get really clear about what equal ground feels like in your body. Seek it out. When you find yourself faced with a scenario in which your needs aren't being met, find equal ground in yourself first, before you try to express that need to yourself or another. This is important because getting to have your needs met is based less upon someone else agreeing that your need is valid and more upon your own validation that your needs get to matter. Understanding that you don't have to fight to be right or make yourself better than another person in order to get a need met makes prioritizing your needs more accessible. Now that you know how to identify and respect your needs, it's time to talk about expressing your needs. As I've said before, the thing that strikes me about needs is how most often it's us who interfere with our own needs getting met by not letting them be known. I know the voice in my own head that says, you don't get to ask for that, or that's selfish, or that doesn't get to matter, or that would be mean for you to ask that. Does that sound familiar? I also know how it feels when I listen to that voice. Not good. That voice thinks it knows what will happen if I try to get a need met, and it stops me before I can even try. As I've learned to listen to that voice less and make my needs more known, I've been pleasantly surprised that what's possible is far greater than what that voice believes when it comes to my needs getting to be considered. Do you also have a voice like this that convinces you not to ask for your needs to be met? If so, what are the sorts of things it says to you? What's it usually scared will happen if you make a request for your need? Record your answers on the handout called Expressing Needs to Yourself. It'd be my guess that there's a correlation between what this inner voice says and what you've been told about needs, and about seeing yourself as part of one reality that you either need to comply with or defy. I'd also like you to consider if you have let this voice inside you squash expressing your needs before. What were the outcomes when you suppressed your needs? How did suppressing your own needs impact you, or your family, your team, or your clients? It's important to take an honest look at what has happened when you have been the one to ignore your needs in the past. I can tell you from my experience, it usually doesn't have the outcome I intended, or there's some kind of collateral result that I didn't want. Being able to change your internal dialogue with expressing your needs to yourself is a necessary step towards expressing your needs to another. When you find this old voice coming up, based on what you've learned in this course, find equal ground in yourself and consider what you might say to this voice from that stance. Maybe you'd say, my needs get to matter. Or you'd remind yourself, my reality isn't in competition with anyone else's reality. Or it might help you to affirm that the consequences of not asking for this will be greater than the consequences of asking. Find the inner dialogue that will help you to remember that prioritizing your needs is not selfish or mean, but part of being human and part of being whole. Okay, so you've tuned in when something has felt off and you've discovered a need. You've remembered that there are two realities and that you're on equal ground because you have inherent worth as a person and because all people have needs. And you've acknowledged what might be scary for you if you listen to your needs instead of prioritizing what someone else wants of you. So, how do you actually express your need to someone else? The clients I work with love when I give them scripts for specific scenarios. And though I can't do that for you, I can give you some general guidance for expressing your needs. First, I'll start by sharing what not to do. Don't be apologetic or meek. Remember, there's not just one reality where you win and they lose if your needs get met. Also, don't tell the other person how it's going to be. That's a demand, not a request. But do share what's true for you and acknowledge how you imagine your request might impact them or how it might land for them. For example, you might say something like, I'm going to need 3 hours of uninterrupted time this afternoon to focus. I imagine that if you need me during that time, that could be frustrating for you, but I'll be back and available after 3 p.m. And look, I get that oftentimes these kind of conversations aren't happening in person with our voice and with eye contact. They're happening via text, email, or through Teams or Slack messages. But the same thing applies. If it feels too bold or rude to you to simply use the technology to express your needs by marking yourself unavailable or putting up a do not disturb or away message, then write a notification that in some way acknowledges what's true for you while also acknowledging the reality of the person or people you're making the request of. Because that's really what this all comes down to. When you express your needs, don't make it all about you. But also, don't make it all about them. So for example, if you're scared that the other person or people you're interacting with will be mad or disappointed in you for requesting a need of yours be met, ask. Show that you're taking their experience into consideration. A great and simple way to do this is to say, what's that like for you? Or if the original request was through technology or at a time when you weren't able to have a conversation, go back and ask, what was that like for you? Because here's the thing. People want to be considered. That's what prioritizing needs is all about. Considering yourself and asking to be considered by others while also considering their needs. In this way, expressing your needs isn't selfish, it's relational. It builds trust and connection to let people know what you need and to consider their needs too. But it does require direct communication. And if you have any shame or any judgment about having needs in the first place, that communication will necessarily come out sideways. So if it's felt awkward to you in the past to express a need, don't underestimate how differently it can feel and how differently it can go when you're able to express your needs in a way that's direct and relational. Here's a hard truth. Even if you get good at recognizing and expressing your needs, it doesn't mean they'll automatically be met. And I'm sorry for that, because I know how much can go into asking for a need to be met. It can be easy to feel like you shouldn't have even bothered to ask if it doesn't get met. It's also understandable if you get upset if it doesn't get met. But here's the thing. Just because your need didn't get met, it doesn't mean that it wasn't valid in the first place. Nor does it mean that it stops being a need. Your needs are valid, and though there are times when they just can't be accommodated, there are some important things to pay attention to. First, is there a trade-off? Just because one need wasn't met, are there other needs still being met that are important to you? Remember the 3 categories of needs? In an ideal situation, your job satisfies your existence, relatedness, and growth needs. But if your growth needs aren't getting met, for example, is that okay with you because most of your existence and relatedness needs are? Perhaps you decide you can get your growth needs outside of your job. Perhaps not. Weighing the importance of your relatedness and growth needs is up to you. But if your existence needs aren't getting met, that's a different story. Not only is that in and of itself an uncomfortable and challenging situation, it also keeps you from progressing into being able to get to your higher needs. And that's where things like fulfillment and meaning and joy come in. If your existence needs aren't being met, I'd highly encourage you to begin looking for different work. Which leads me to my second point for you to pay attention to. And that's how considered do you routinely feel in your job? For example, if a request for a need of yours wasn't accommodated, did you feel like your need was at least regarded? Or were you shamed or made fun of or punished in some way? Or if your need wasn't met, did you receive understanding or some other form of accommodation that made you feel seen and respected? Because it's very real that not all of your needs will be met because everyone has needs all the time. But that doesn't mean it's okay to have that be a constant experience. With that, if you work in an environment where it either doesn't feel safe to you to express your needs, or your needs and your reality are continually not regarded, that requires a reckoning. Needs are important. You aren't special or precious for having them, and you won't someday transcend them. So you need to be honest with yourself about whether your situation is one in which you feel you can safely express your needs and feel considered even if they can't be met. Having said that, I recognize that all workplaces are different and that there are different levels of privilege you may or may not have in terms of feeling like you get to even think about leaving or changing jobs in order to prioritize your needs. But I would ask you to not disregard yourself and to center yourself from the inside out about being on even ground. From this place, I trust that you can honor what's true for you and do what you can to meet your needs. Everyone, including you, deserves that. Being a needless person has become an epidemic, particularly in the workplace. It's common to see having no needs as a badge of honor, even when we're stressed out, burnt out, and resenting everyone around us because of the cycles of people-pleasing and overworking we can get caught in. I'm here to tell you that no one wins when you try to live as a needless person. I hope that you too can see that. And maybe through what you've learned in this course, you can appreciate that you now have the tools to shift out of false needlessness and into a reality where you can prioritize what matters to you. Ultimately, that isn't selfish. It's relational. Recognizing, respecting, and expressing our needs honors our vulnerability and our interdependence as people. We can't get to a humane and balanced workplace until we start regarding and treating ourselves and each other as humans who have needs. Thank you for joining me and for learning together. May this course help you